Oh, goodness. Hi. Oh, yeah. You know what? I think I was here for a reason. I was supposed to tell y'all that this is a disclaimer, right? Yeah, I'm going to be spoiling season 1 of The Flash. So don't forget to go watch it and watch this video, okay? Yeah, bye. Welcome back, my Flash fans. You already know what time it is. It is Sunday and it's time for that season 1 Flash review. And if you are not sure what Flash is, it is the show The Flash from the channel or station CW. So before we get into the video, like I said before, don't forget to go watch that. But before we get into the video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. First of all, the obvious point is that Barry Allen became the Flash, and even in season 1, episode 1, we find out that it wasn't an accident, but we don't necessarily know why it happened or what exactly happened. And at the end of the episode of season 1, episode 1, we also find out that Wells is not paralyzed and he's not who he says he is, or at least as far as we know. So we already know that something shady is going on with Dr. Wells, if that's even his real name. And we know that he may be helping Barry for a different reason than he claimed to be. We also know that Joe does not want Iris to know about Barry's powers, and against Barry's, will, he doesn't tell Iris about his powers, which does affect the mood of the season throughout the entire season. It causes Iris to lose trust in Barry because she feels like he's lying to her, which he is. And we know, based off of watching season 1, that they are best friends, so this would be a really big secret that he's kept from her in forever. The next big part of season 1 that we learned actually in the first episode, but it kind of develops and we learn more about it as the season goes on, was that Barry's mother was killed when he was 10. And obviously we know from watching season 1 that it was not his dad that killed him, although it's what everybody claims that happened. It was actually a speedster, just like Barry, but nobody really knows a lot of that story. Even Barry doesn't know completely what happens, but all he knows is that his father is innocent. But, not everybody believed in what happened because nothing like this has happened since Barry became the Flash. So now this is when a lot more people are starting to believe Barry and starting to look more into the case and look what happened to Barry's mother, which does come into play towards the end of the season of 1. The next big thing that happened in The Flash was actually when Dr. Wells revealed part of himself to Simon Stagg when he killed him. We already know from the first episode that Wells is definitely not who he says he is, and we know that he is definitely someone who has secrets. And one of the biggest ones, at least for the beginning of the season, is that he's not paralyzed and that he in fact can walk. And so we learn more about this in the episode with Simon Stagg because he ends up killing Simon Stagg. But he doesn't do it when he's sitting in the chair. He gets up and he walks. Now, as the season 1 plot, just continues, Barry does learn more about his mother's death, and he does learn more about the killer of her death. He learns that the killer was actually a speedster like Barry, but at first he doesn't necessarily understand why that is because there shouldn't have been a killer at that time frame because there was no particle accelerator, or at least that's what Barry thought. And so once he enlists the help of Joe West, which is his foster dad, and Caitlin and Cisco, who are his friends that are on Team Flash, and in some ways Dr. Wells, he does learn that the killer was in fact a speedster, and he can draw that conclusion, but he also learns that the killer comes back into town after years of being away, which puts Barry on edge, especially because they have a new villain that is coming to town. We're going to talk a little bit of Joe West, Joe West is very intuitive and he's a very observant person. Obviously, he kind of has to be because he is a detective. But when it comes to Dr. Wells, he is even more overprotective of Barry. And I think it was because from day one, he already knew that something was off with Dr. Wells. If you remember in the beginning of the show, that Dr. Wells requested that Barry come to his facility because he claimed that he could help him and give him the help he needed to live and survive, which he did, but that doesn't mean that Joe didn't think that something was wrong. And that whole thing of Joe just being curious and being cautious of Wells does come into play more during the middle of the season, especially when the Reverse Flash comes back into town. Because when Joe and Barry started researching Barry's mother's death again, he started looking into the Reverse Flash because that's when they realized that that might have been the killer of Barry's mom. And so after a while, the Reverse Flash comes back into town, but he threatens Joe. He tells him not to look into Barry's mother's case or else he will kill Iris, which obviously Iris is Joe's, daughter, and he would never want anything to happen to her, so he stopped looking into the case. And so a few episodes later, the Reverse Flash confronts Barry, which obviously puts Barry in a different headspace. But throughout all of this, Joe doesn't necessarily think that Wells is innocent of being connected to the Reverse Flash. He doesn't necessarily know how, but he doesn't think that he's some innocent pawn. So now this brings me to another major plot twist during this season. The fact that Caitlin's fiance Ronnie is in fact not dead. Now this is something that's very shocking because early on in the season again, we find out, Caitlin's backstory, how she ended up having a fiance but he died during the particle accelerator. And this was not something that could have been, he might have died. This was something that he most definitely did die, or so they thought. He was inside the particle accelerator when it exploded. So obviously they knew that, he died. A professor named Stein, Professor Stein, was actually at Star Labs the day the particle accelerator exploded. Now this comes into play when we realize that Ronnie isn't dead. And we realize this off of a few things. Caitlin goes to the mall to shop for Harrison Wells, and she sees somebody that looks like Ronnie. And it is Ronnie, but it's not completely Ronnie. And that's where Stein comes into play because we find out from Hartley that when the particle accelerator exploded, he fused together with Stein and they became Firestorm. And so when this happened, Professor Stein went missing and Ronnie went missing, but Ronnie was still in his body, but Professor Stein was in his head. So this is why Ronnie was not, Ronnie. He was only just there. Which kind of hurt Caitlin even more because after the fact of her accepting that Ronnie was gone, she had to deal with Ronnie not being Ronnie, which was very difficult for her, and it also helped develop the plot line of season 1. So during the middle of the season 1, I think it was the episode The Reverse Flash. I'm not sure which episode it was, but I do know that it was around that Christmas episode, or it was that Christmas episode, and actually what happened was we found out that Harrison Wells is indeed the Reverse Flash. Now this is not surprising to people who have watched the season 1 series, or season, because we already knew that there was something suspicious going on with Wells. But this has been confirmed, so now what happens from there? Well, people on the team and people around Barry who know who Barry is, who knows who Wells is, starts to build suspicion. And besides Joe, the first person to build that suspicion was the person who worked with Iris. And he thought that, Harrison Wells was the Reverse Flash, which he was entirely correct. But Wells did something to prevent him from revealing that truth to anybody. Wells does kill the person who works with Iris. But before that person dies, what actually happens is he tells Iris his thoughts. He tells Iris that he does not believe that Wells is who he says he is. And so during this, Iris does tell Barry. And this has both Iris and Barry saying, well, we just don't believe that. But after a while, that suspicion does turn into something else, and it does develop the whole entire season. So eventually, after everybody knows about the Reverse Flash, they try to catch him. And this is a very important part of season 1, especially because of who was there when they tried to catch him. Harrison Wells was there, Eddie Thawne was there, Joe West was there, Barry was there, and so these are all important people because when they tried to catch Reverse Flash, the Reverse Flash would only talk to Harrison Wells. Now, this is something that is very interesting considering the fact that everybody thinks that Wells is not who he says he is. But by Wells having won a conversation with the Reverse Flash, it eliminates him from being the Reverse Flash. It turns people's heads. It makes them believe that he isn't, which buys him a little more time for himself before he does eventually get revealed. The other thing that happens that is very weird was that the Reverse Flash tried to kill Harrison Wells. Again, by this action happening, this eliminates Harrison Wells from being the Reverse Flash, or so everybody thinks, which is what we will later discuss. And so that is why this event during season 1 is very important, because now everybody can say, well, they were in the same room and Reverse Flash, he tried to kill Harrison, so why would that be Harrison Wells? It doesn't give them that person anymore. It just takes him away. So eventually, after they figure out what exactly happened to Professor Stein and Ronnie, they realize that there is something that's really, really wrong, which is the fact that if Professor Stein and Ronnie do not separate, they will blow up, which is not only bad for both of them because then they both die and they are not dead at all. It will also be a major catastrophe for Central City. So obviously, doing what Team Flash does, they try to prevent this from happening. And so they bring Professor Stein and Ronnie to this place where there's nobody there. It's a long way away from Central City. And so they end up splitting Professor Stein and Ronnie. This also brings a lot of other problems to the whole situation, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now that Professor Stein and Ronnie are separated, they think that everything is going to go smoothly. But it really doesn't. After, I guess, just a few days, things start to go south for Firestorm. And they realize that hey guys, it's Editing Eden. I'm over here editing my video and I realized that the camera shut off when I was finishing up my video. So I'm just going to be finishing the video right here for you guys, telling you everything that you missed. So I think I was cut off when I was explaining what happened to Ronnie and Professor Stein. They ended up having issues and they weren't as separate as they thought. So they had to figure out a way to make sure that, they could survive with either being separated or not separated. But the other issue they had was General Eiling. He wanted them to himself. He just wanted Firestorm. He was just very obsessed with them, and so he tried to destroy anything that got in his way, including Barry, and things like that. So they had to kind of get away from Eiling, and in doing that, they had to leave Central City, and that is exactly what they did. And this is when mostly everybody is convinced that, Harrison Wells is the Reverse Flash, including the whole Team Flash. And I'm going to be honest here, Caitlin was not completely convinced, but I don't think that she was on the fact that Harrison Wells was not a good person. I think it was just taking her a while to process it. So what ended up happening was Joe and Cisco went to Star City to go look at the site where Harrison Wells' fiance had died at, the car crash, because they thought that something might have happened. So they went there, and then, here, back at Central City, Barry and the rest of the team, Cisco and Caitlin, they kind of just stayed here doing business as usual until they got back with any information that could help them. And they eventually did. So they came back, and pretty much what happened was they dug up a body in Star City, and it turned out to be Harrison Wells. And Barry tested the body, and he said that it was indeed Harrison Wells. So the next big question that came up for them was, who have they been working for, and why was it that that person that they saw on the table was Harrison Wells, but the person in the building that they were working with was clearly not. So right after that, Cisco admitted something, that in the last timeline, the one Barry erased, he had been getting visions or dreams or whatever he liked to call them, or vibes. We're not really there yet. He had realized that in that last timeline, Harrison Wells, or whoever he really is, killed him because Cisco wanted to go back and see what happened the night that they tried to capture the Reverse Flash. And so he ended up doing that, but when he did that, he realized that it was a hologram, and then Harrison Wells comes downstairs and he says that his name is Eobard Thawne, and then he kills Cisco. But this doesn't exactly happen because, well, Cisco is still alive, clearly, and Barry erased that timeline. So Harrison Wells does not know that because obviously Barry erased it, but Cisco does. And so he thinks it's important to tell the team, and he does. And so that kind of sets a lot of things in motion. So now I guess what happens is that they want to figure out if this was true and if this works. So they go and they recreate the night that happened, but it was a twist. Harrison Wells is smarter mostly than them, so obviously he knew that this was a trick. And at this point, he knows that they know who he is. And so he sends a meta that they captured, and he sends him in instead of him. Harrison sends the meta in instead of him. That sounded really confusing. And he turns into Harrison Wells. He was the meta that was able to look like anybody but not copy the abilities or powers they had. So they tried to capture him, but when they captured him, they realized that he was a human. And this is when Harrison Wells comes into the intercom and he reveals himself, and he says that he is the Reverse Flash, and now everybody is upset. They hate this, they hate him. They just were wondering why he kept it a secret for so long. And so then Barry ends up going into the time vault, and he realizes that Harrison Wells, or whoever he really is, or actually Eobard Thawne, has been watching them since the very, very beginning. He has cameras everywhere, at Iris's job, in their houses, everywhere. He's known about everything, and they don't realize this. They only have just realized this now, and so Barry goes to find Iris because obviously of how he feels about her, but he realizes that Wells, he took Eddie, and now this is all making sense. Eddie Thawne, Eobard Thawne. So yeah, I mean, he took Eddie for a specific reason, and it honestly does have to do with their last name and them sharing it, because we do find out that Eddie is the great-great-grandfather of Eobard Thawne. I think I got that right. It might have been another great in there, but we know that for Eobard Thawne to live, Eddie has to live. So, Eddie cannot die if Thawne wants to live. Thawne knows that, but, Eddie obviously doesn't. So, I guess he's more of like insurance that Thawne stays alive during this specific time period. So now Barry is promising Iris that he will get Eddie back to her, and in the process of doing this, he does this electricity thingy. I don't really know how to explain it, and she realizes that was Barry because she felt the exact same thing the night that Barry was in the hospital, or the nights that Barry was in the hospital. So this leads her to find out that Barry is the Flash. Now, obviously, because this was a big decision, and a big part of Barry's life for so long, I guess it was almost a year, Iris is furious with Barry. She is completely upset with the fact that he is the Flash and he never told her. And she's even more mad at the fact that her dad knew and he told Barry not to tell her. And so this definitely puts a strain on a lot of these relationships, and it makes everything in the future more tense. It makes everything more difficult, especially for them working together. I guess it wouldn't be that long, but it does hurt things. Now, we've talked about Grodd, I believe, and Grodd ends up coming to town and kidnaps Joe, long story short, and so Barry has to go get him back, but Grodd is a telepathic gorilla, so that is obviously a very difficult thing. Barry can't just go rescue Joe and call it a day. He has to build software, or they need to help Barry figure out a way to go there and not be messed with, his mind not to be messed with, but they obviously don't have, I guess, the main glue of the team, which is Harrison Wells there. It's just them. So, obviously with Cisco and his technical expertise, he does build something, but it doesn't necessarily last completely long. But that is alright because Barry does end up getting Joe back. And so while Barry's in the process of finding Eddie, they find something, or at least Cisco does, and he realizes that the particle accelerator is about to be turned back on. This is obviously terrible from the last time that this happened. It blew up the whole entire city. So now they're trying to figure out why this is happening. They're trying to figure out how this even happened in the first place. They're trying to figure out all these things. And they realize that it was Harrison Wells' doing. And they, from that, find Eddie in the basement. And they, find him, I guess. Yeah. But something that's very, very, very interesting that happened before they found him was that Wells, or Eobard Thawne, I have to start calling him that, I guess, showed Eddie something from the future. He showed him a newspaper. Now, I'm going to be honest, this newspaper is very important, very important for the whole entire series. It's something that makes its appearance on every single season. But in the newspaper, it said that the Flash vanishing, missing in crisis, which is obviously alarming. But to Eddie, the more alarming thing was the person who wrote the newspaper and the byline on it. It said Iris West Allen. Now, if you have forgotten, Barry's last name is Allen, so this does mean that Barry and Iris got married in the future. Which makes Eddie obviously mad and disappointed because he thought that he would be the person to marry Iris and he doesn't. So this does affect the rest of the season, which will not be very long because I'm pretty sure by now we are on episode 20 or 21, and there's only 23 in this season. So when they bring Eddie back up, he tells Iris about the byline on the newspaper, and she gets confused because she's just like, how is this? And I guess the bigger thing for them is the fact that her name was Iris West Allen. To me, it seems kind of annoying that, the bigger thing isn't that Barry goes missing, but, that's them. And so now they don't really know how to move on, I guess, for a little bit, but they eventually do. And so now the other issue that comes about is that the particle accelerator is still being turned back on. Now, this is difficult because there are people in the pipeline, which is inside the particle accelerator, and there are metas. So you can only imagine what would happen if the particle accelerator turns back on and the metas are in the particle accelerator. That would be terrible. So Barry figures out a way to try and use Leonard Snart and his sister to bring the metas to, I'm pretty sure they wanted to bring them to Lian Yu, which was a place, which was the actual island that Oliver Queen was on, if you've ever watched The Arrow. And so, but it really does backfire on Barry because Barry is not that type of hero. He's not a vigilante, so he doesn't really know how to use people like that. He's a hero, which becomes more abundant or abundantly clear after Leonard uses Barry and he lets all the metas go. I think the end of this episode they figure out that the particle accelerator was not going to turn back on. It was just something that Eobard Thawne needed to get back home. Because it's come to the point where he wants to go home. Everybody knows what he is. He's created the Flash. He's done his job. But now he can't. Obviously, Barry is in the way. So Barry calls a few people to help him capture Eobard Thawne. He calls Oliver Queen, which is the Arrow, and he calls Firestorm. So I haven't really talked about this, but throughout the season, Oliver Queen has made appearances on the season, and he's helped Barry one way or another. So in this episode, he helps Barry try to defeat Eobard Thawne, which he doesn't completely defeat him, but he does capture him. So in the next episode, Barry asks the question he's been waiting to ask the murderer of his mother for years, which was, why did he kill her? And so Eobard Thawne told him straight up, he said, because he hates him. He said that it wasn't that Barry, but it was the future Barry. He said that they are enemies, they are forever rivals, which is true. If you've ever read the comics or if you've watched the entire series, you just know that Eobard Thawne and Barry Allen are forever rivals. They are main rivals. They hate each other. They are exact opposite. So Eobard Thawne wants to go home. But obviously Barry will not let him do this. So he gives Barry an option. He says that for him to be able to go home, Barry will be able to go back in the future and save his mom from ever being killed. Now, this is obviously something that Barry would obviously want to do, but he obviously does not want to let Thawne go. So this was a very, very difficult decision for Barry. So it was something that he had to think about. It was something that he had to ask multiple people about, and he came to the decision that he wanted to go back and save his mother. Now, obviously, this would affect a lot, because if his mother never died, then a few things wouldn't happen. So now Barry goes back to save his mother, and Thawne, he goes and he tries to leave and, go back to where he came from. Barry does not save his mother. I feel like it was more of a closure thing for him, but he does not save his mother, and so he comes back and he stops Thawne from going back to the future. And this angers Thawne, because obviously he wanted to go back home, but, now it's the person who he hates the most is stopping him. So he threatens to kill Barry, the rest of the team, and so the only person who can really kill Thawne is Eddie, and he does, and he kills him by killing himself, because he realizes that if Eddie if Thawne was never born because Eddie died, he would be erased from existence. So that's what happened. Now, Eddie and Thawne are both dead. Well, Eddie and Eobard, are both dead. They're both erased from existence. But another bigger issue happens because Barry went back in time. A singularity erupted in Central City, which a singularity is basically a big hole. So now Ronnie, Professor Stein, and Barry are trying to figure out a way to stop it. Barry runs into the big old hole, the big old black hole, to save the city, and that is where the season ends off. It is a major cliffhanger because of everything that literally just happened. But that is how the episode ends, and the whole entire season 1 ends. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm so sorry that my camera shut off, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a big fat thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Comment down below if you are excited for the season 2 review that will be out next Sunday. And if you would like me to review any other shows, like I have mentioned The Arrow, which is very connected or very much connected to The Flash. So let me know if you guys want me to review The Arrow as well. But I guess that's it for this Sunday's video. I will see you, my Flash fans, next Sunday. Bye!